All right. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone from Minnesota, the rest of the United States, and around other parts of the world. Welcome to the East-West Connection Zoom event, Ukrainian refugees on the Polish border. And for those of you who are wondering what East-West Connections is, we were formerly the Russian-American Business and Culture Council. I want to thank our co-sponsors tonight, East-West Connections, the Museum of Russian Art, Global Minnesota, and Alight. I'm your moderator this evening, Mark Jorgensen. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer who spent the majority of my career in Eastern Europe, including just recently areas that are directly affected by the war in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and I actually helped open the US Embassy in Kyiv, Ukraine in 1993. Our program tonight is regarding the Ukrainian refugees and what has happened because of the invasion of Russia, Russia invading Ukraine. Since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, the BBC estimates that over 13 million, or almost 29% of the Ukrainian population has fled their homes, with 6 million leaving Ukraine and 6.5 million internally displaced refugees. Experts are saying that this is the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Tonight, we're very lucky to have two subject matter experts on this situation who have direct personal experience working with Ukrainian refugees. First, Angela Eifert, the Global Connector Lead at Alight. Alight, formerly the American Refugee Committee, has been working directly with Ukrainian refugees leaving Ukraine. Angela, after 10 years of working in the financial services industry, she reinvented herself and found her true north of mission-driven work serving international communities. At the start of her journey, it was Rotary International that opened her mind and heart to possibilities beyond her imagination. Finding her place at Alight, again, formerly the American Refugee Committee, 5 years later, Angela has been a global connector for and with displaced people around the world and has been doing the work she loves for almost 10 years. It was soon after she started her time at Alight that a major intersection of connections with Rotary and Alight would come together. Her belief in people and the unique gifts of every person to change the life of one that ripples the lives of many keeps her motivated to connect more and more people across the globe. And our second expert tonight is Bernadine Jocelyn, who was actually in Poland working to assist refugees coming from Ukraine. Bernadine spent the first 15 years of her professional life in Soviet and then post-Soviet affairs. She served 7 years as diplomat with the US Department of State, including tours in New Delhi, Moscow, and Washington, DC. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Bernadine left the diplomatic corps to manage the international academic and cultural exchange programs with the International Research and Exchanges Board, also known as IREX, and subsequently to open and lead Eurasia Foundation's first Moscow office. Since 2001, Bernadine has served as founding director of Blandin Foundation's Public Policy and Engagement Program. A native of Minnesota, Bernadine has a master's degree in international affairs and a certificate in advanced Soviet studies from Columbia University. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree and Master of Public Affairs degree from the University of Minnesota. Bernadine currently lives in Grand Rapids, Minnesota with her Kyiv-born husband. She is a founding member of the board of East-West Connections. I would just ask our viewers to please send any questions you have via the chat in Zoom, and I will relay these to our guests over about the last 15 minutes of the event. So without further ado, since we have a very interesting and important subject, I'll turn things over to Angela.
Thank you, Mark. That was a wonderful introduction. And I will go ahead and share my screen. And do you see that?
Yep.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and walk us through. You've met me, but I'll go ahead and just give another background here. Angela Eifert, I lead our Global Connectors team at Alight, which is basically an intersection for donors and supporters who want to work with us where we work in our global programming around the world. And our team is often the way to meet and engage with our work. So happy to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to share our work with you in Poland-Ukraine response. So I'll start with some background on who Alight is and move more into what we are doing in Poland and Ukraine currently. So as was mentioned, we formerly were American Refugee Committee, and we were American Refugee Committee for over 40 years, and then we changed our name to Alight. And that has been about a 10-year journey that I will try to share a little bit more background on, but it is a bit of a long journey that got us here. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next page and just share with you the work that we've been doing at American Refugee Committee for over 40 years is still the work that we do today. We still do serve a variety of services that are critical life-saving resources for people who've been displaced from war or conflict and are protected under the United Nations as refugees. And we are mandated by the United Nations High Commissioners for Refugees, also known as UNHCR, and we work in mostly refugee camps and settlements where there are tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people who've been displaced. And so we serve water, healthcare, protection support, trauma care, the list goes on. We do livelihoods, economic programming to help people to rebuild their lives after displacement. And one major difference I will say from American Refugee Committee to now Alight is that not only are we providing those critical life-saving resources that we know people need to live, we also know that they are not a life. And so our big journey as Alight is to create a meaningful life with and for the displaced. And that is really helping them to build the life that they had hoped and was working toward, that they dream of. It really is who they are and where they're going, that we are trying to support them on that journey, because we know that people live in refugee camps on average for 20 years. We very much believe in unleashing the abundance of everyday people, that we are an organization that is meant to engage people to realize the idealism that they see in the world. We are here to help people see their way forward to support people who've been displaced. We work in international scope. We don't actually work in the US, but we are a way for people to support that work based here in Minneapolis. We do this work with these values. It's for us, we put a lot of attention into the how we do this work going forward as an Alight organization. And these are the 7 values that really drive and guide all of our work and actions on a daily basis. Being human-centered, which is really to say that the refugee community is at the center of solutions. They are the ones that we design around and want them to have a voice in all of the ways that we are supporting them. That they are as much at the table in that design work for the services that they receive as we are, or that any of the authorities are as well, that they are a critical voice at the table. Bravely be better, spark joy, choose optimism. You know, I often say, you know, spark joy and choose optimism. Sometimes people are not always sure they understand where, given where we work. We do work in what can be seen as very scarce environments. And really, we've discovered that joy is a necessity in all lives. And without it, it is not a dignified life at all. And it really is required. So we really approach our work from that lens of abundance and bring that joy factor into everything we're doing, because it makes such a difference. And really having to be intentional about optimism, right? And just, unleashing abundance in the face of scarcity. Start with giving, find others, and doing the doable. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about doing the doable in just a bit. Our core beliefs at Alight are: we believe that there is a simple human justice in the chance to build a life. We believe in an abundant world full of amazing people who want to help. And we believe in doing a better thing. And sometimes people wonder why it's not the best thing. And our answer for that is because we don't actually know what the best thing is. All we can do is make our informed decisions in any given moment to do the better thing. And so that's what we strive to do in all of our daily programming and in the ways that we respond to the people that we support. This is a map of where we work. We work in 20 countries, and sorry, are you able to see that? Did we lose it?
Yeah, we still have a little part of it, but it's kind of blacked out a little bit.
Something happened. I'm having technical issues here. Sorry about that. We might have to stop and share again. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I will do that. I think something happened to my screen. Oh, okay, here it is. Yeah, I'm having some issues with. Sorry about that.
The wonders of modern technology.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing this. It's not letting me pull up my screen now. Boy, apologize for this. Let's see if I can retrieve this. Okay, stop share. Try it again. Yeah, I'm having a web issue. Something is going on with my web page. So it's not letting me pull up my web. I'm not sure why.
Maybe.
Let's try this. Yeah. Oh, here, try it. Let's see if this will work. I've never had this happen before, so I'm not sure what's going on. Here, let's try this. Okay, can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, I'm back. So I'll just get back to my, it's downloading. It's taking a minute to download. Looks like. Okay, sorry about that. I could probably go on in my head, but I'd rather show the pictures. But I'll just start with the map. Since you saw the map, we work in 20 countries across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And we also work on the US-Mexico border, as well as El Salvador. And we do currently also have programming in the US for the Afghan evacuee response that we did in Minneapolis, and are still doing that work that we worked with the state of Minnesota to respond to the resettlement of Afghans in Minnesota. Okay, so it's just taking some time to download. It'll be up shortly. Don't remember what page we were on here.
In the meantime, Angela,
Yep,
Looks like-
we're back.
There.
Yeah. back.
Okay,
Yep, and I just will give you a minute to look at the screen if you wanted to capture the locations that we work. But you'll see that most of our work is in East Africa. And we'll go on to the next page here. And I just mentioned the Afghan response that we do in Minnesota. So this is a program that we took on starting in November, December of last year and have been working up until now and are still doing housing resettlement for Afghans who have come into Minnesota and have been living in a hotel waiting for housing. And there has been, because of the housing crisis, it's been slower than we had anticipated to find housing. But we are nearing the end of that program and we're able to engage a lot of people here in the Twin Cities to show up and actually fill these houses with culturally sensitive food and items that Afghan community would really want, you know, like their Qurans and their prayer rugs and really fill these homes with all of the necessities so they wouldn't have to find them or figure out how to do that after such a really difficult journey of living in a military base and then moving into a hotel. So they've been in so much transition since August. And so the Afghan community here was a program that we took on with the state of Minnesota to help welcome them. Okay, so now back onto Ukraine. So we started a week after the invasion. We were on the border of Poland. We were on the Medica border in Poland, responding to the Ukraine crisis. And the work that we were doing early on was very rapid assessment, very rapid needs-based. We call it doing the doable. And that's one of the values that I had pointed out earlier. Doing the doable for us has a lot of we respond to our work around the world with doing the doable in very different ways. But in the case of Ukraine, we were responding to emergency crisis, and doing the doable allows us to be very flexible. It allows us to respond to the needs that people have in any given moment, and we will mobilize to get those those needs met right away. And that looked like a few different ways in the first month, right? We were doing medical supply delivery into Ukraine to fill hospitals, undersupplied hospitals and orphanages that needed medical supplies. We were also getting medical supplies and food into bomb shelters for people who were living underground. And we're still doing some of that work still. Some of the doing the doable look like helping volunteers in Poland, firefighters and police to respond to people coming in to Poland. And it also looked like, you know, obviously the new arrivals, the millions of people coming over that border, responding to their needs. And the first 2 months, month or so was definitely very cold. So a lot of that work looked like heating blankets, hats, coats, warm beverages, warming tents to give people after, you know, maybe walking 20 hours in the cold, giving them a place of respite in a warm place on that border before they would find their navigation to one of the reception centers which is more inland. So we were helping to guide and navigate as well with a restful moment in warmth. So we called it a mile of warmth for the first month. And so that's what doing the doable allowed us to do. It just really, whatever those needs were in any given moment, we could respond rapidly and effectively with nimble response. And the next part of our response really was, it is this guiding. I'll show you a light guide, and then I'll talk about aid to art. The Alight guides is really what we're doing now as more of our kind of midterm response. The emergency response of doing the doable is moving more into this midterm and longer term. response, which is really vetting and validating information and resources, making sure that that people coming from Ukraine into Poland can find information to navigate their next steps and where they need to go safely. We also have referred to this as safe passage, really giving people information and safe transportation, pointing them to where to find vetted and bonded and licensed transportation, where to find the train stations, all of the information that people who are coming over. And we're doing digital guide. We have a digital platform now to alert people in Ukraine who are still coming over to find that information. And we're channeling it out through signage along the way of that route, and also engaging other Ukrainians and trust networks to get that information in the hands of people who need it. So that's our information guide. And we're also doing housing. So we're partnered with Airbnb currently to match up all of the housing that has been made available through their donor base to people who need housing coming over the border. And that has, early on, there was a lot of availability because the people who needed the housing didn't know how to find the housing. And so now we're being activated to really guide people and match them to appropriate housing for, the size of the family, length of time and destination that they are hoping to be settled into for longer term. And then our longer term housing is still in, we're looking to transition into more midterm and longer term housing as well. And so we're designing out what that will look like, because we know this will be a protracted refugee displacement. And those housing needs will need to evolve into from short term to midterm and long term. So we do have design teams doing human-centered design to really think through in every location, all of the host countries, how can we best serve people who are going to be here for the next 6 months, year, possibly 2 or 3 years. And so that work is in motion. And these are just some pictures that will show you, our team on the ground on the border. This is actually all happening on the Medica border here. We're meeting volunteers. We were working very closely with the Polish authorities to respond to the many needs for warming, blankets and things at the time, and medical supplies. We needed lots of wheelchairs. There was a great need for wheelchairs. And we mobilized to get those and support the volunteers in getting those because firefighters and volunteers were there lifting people from buses because there weren't any wheelchairs. So we were able to fill some of those immediate gaps with our doing a doable response. We also were asked by Polish authorities to help with the cleanup of all of the non-food items, also known as NFIs. That would litter. There were so many people coming over and they were given packages of food, but that would become litter. And so eventually the areas were really becoming quite full of trash. And so we actually helped the Polish authorities to bring in waste management and have been managing the cleanup of garbage as well. This is again just showing kind of the packing of socks and warm items. And then this is just showing you a picture of the digital platform of our information guide program. And so you can see that new arrivals or people who are en route are able to download the information navigation, kind of the wayfinding system for a light, and are able to engage with the information whatever they're looking for. There's different categories they can find for shelter, transportation. Maybe it's, I know it's probably not very big, and I don't dare hit my screen to maximize it for fear that it'll close out again. So, but this is basically a summary of our response. We've been there for 3 months and really focusing in on housing and information navigation at the moment. The very last program I will mention is the Aid to Art. Aid to Art program, we have a list of 450 artists and designers from Ukraine who've been displaced. And we are able to be connected to them because we were given a list, of who they are. And we're currently raising funds to pay them $1,000 cash payout to allow them to live and also allow them to do what they do, which is to make art. And we'd like to put that on a live auction of some sort. Maybe it's an NFT or Web3 auction or some other channel for that art to be distributed for public awareness and basically more fundraising support as well. But it would be a really, we're excited about engaging artists and designers to have a way to live and have that economic support for the next 2 months, but also be able to do what they do to share their journey through their art and allow the rest of the world to come in and support them and others through the campaign of art and telling that story of the journey that they've been on. So the Aid to Art program is one that we're just now launching. And we're starting to do those payouts to the artists and the designers to get working. So just wanted to share that with you as a really cool program that we're doing. If anyone is interested in learning more or have connections to different distribution platforms, we'd love to hear from you.
Great.
But Mark, I'll hand it back to you.
Angela, amazing. You guys are doing great work. It's great to hear all the things you're doing and the help you're providing. Bernadine Jocelyn is here. Bernadine, we talked a little bit about your bio earlier. Maybe you can tell us about your experience, because you were on the border helping as well, how you got there, where you were, what you saw.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much, Angela. That was just fascinating, really inspiring. What I hope to do is to bring a little first-person perspective to what Angela talked about. And I'm going to go ahead, Mark, here and share. I've got to put together a few pictures. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So about my experience, really what Angela was talking about through a first-person lens of a Minnesotan, like I'm assuming most of us on the call here who really care a lot about what's going on in the world and may have different connections to Ukraine and Russia and Europe, that whole part of the world. So my story is kind of unique, and I think maybe emblematic of how many of us find different threads of connections. It's a big world out there, and Minnesota is at the intersection of a lot of it. You may recognize my face. This is me as a young diplomat in the late 80s in Russia, and I was privileged to serve, as Mark was, for many years in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I brought that connection, that professional, and then, as you'll hear about in a minute, more personal connection to Russia into my life, and on, as we all were, on the 24th of February, when there we are all listening, and all of a sudden Putin is on the radio announcing, listening to it on NPR, a special operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. And then he went on, and I've got the radio on. I'm sitting here in my living room in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where I'm coming to you from, joining tonight. And my husband, my second husband, Dennis Goychuk, is with me. And Dennis was born in Kiev. His mother is Ukrainian, his father is Russian. And since we've married, he's now a US citizen. So he and I are sitting in the living room listening to this news. Meanwhile, his parents, Olga and Volodya, are in Kiev with his cousins as the news is happening. And this is my little son, Alex, and when he was born in Moscow, when I was serving there as a diplomat, and on the 24th of, he's now 23 years old, on the 24th of February, he was on the beach in Hollywood, kind of wandered off and out of reach. So that's what was kind of going on in my life, and on that afternoon. And this is Alex's dad, Valery Valerievich Fadeev, who is on the 24th of February, was in Moscow where he continues to live in the apartment where he lived then, and in the same job he had then, which is a senior staff to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Russian Federative Council. So Putin, working in the administration of Vladimir Putin that day. And the first couple weeks of the war, I'm sure, like many of you, they're connected. And I just want to point out that in the 21st century, I think it's unusual to have a war that starts like that. The things tend to evolve and change, and kind of, we always, talk about the how World War I kind of stumbled into happening. But here we had Putin was, made this speech, and for the first couple of weeks, just riveted to the news and couldn't really go on with our lives. And I get an email from a colleague of mine through the then still named Russian American Business and Culture Council, which had to face its own moment of truth. How are we going to respond as an organization to what's gone on? I get an email from my colleague on the board from an organization that's seeking volunteers to go to the border to help receive war evacuees. And I'd never heard of this organization. I'm not Jewish by heritage. This is the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which turns out is the oldest global humanitarian organization on the planet, with this interesting, very, full of pathos creation story, when then Ambassador Morgenthau, to save the Jews that were then stuck in Ottoman-controlled Palestine. And still to this day, it's one of the amazing global humanitarian response machines, almost complexes that Angela and Light is now part of. And they were looking for, much as Light was, people immediate response. And at that time, and I think it's grown a little since then, but in late April, there's over 5 million refugees have left Ukraine. And of those, the overwhelming majority of them have come to Poland. But on top of that, look at that, 7 million displaced within the country, over a quarter, probably huge displacement. And the joint, as it's called, was recruiting people to go to the border. And as Angela said, be part of that, do the doable, just on the spot. This photograph is from the refugee center, which I'll talk a bit more about, on the border in Kosovo, near the Medica border that Angela showed. And so I joined, I got this application online. It asked, what are my skills? And I was all kind of puffed up. Well, but could I drive a truck? Was I a teacher? Could I provide medical or psychological help? Or could I, fix plumbing or set up an internet connection? I could do none of that. All I could do was I could speak Russian, and I had some experience from, working as Mark did in the diplomatic course. So raised my hand on a Thursday. They called me up. I sent in the application, hit send on a Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I get a phone call, and they said, do you know about this JDC? And are you hip with that? That's cool. And can you leave on Tuesday? So Tuesday morning, I'm in Warsaw, and this is another one of the volunteers, Anna, who came from, she's a Russian immigrant herself, a Russian-speaking from Vancouver, who joined the efforts. So Angela showed a map just to give you a little sense. Can you see my pointer on there? Yes. So you see the pretty big border here with Poland and Ukraine. And now there's a lot to talk about, because we're talking about the accession of Finland, maybe to NATO, which is all about how this war got started. But anyway, we were down here, this part that Angela was talking, we were the border of Medica, in the very southern part of the border there. And here's another photograph. You can see Medica here, and Corsica, which is where the refugee center was. And here's a kind of relative to Lviv, which is, so we weren't really that far south of, everything's relative, of Lviv. So the striking thing about this refugee crisis is that is as a very feminine, women and children, 90% women and children. And of course, we understand that's true mostly because, or at least a big part because the Ukrainian government has decreed that men between the ages of 16 and 60 may not leave the country and to be ready for mobilization. And it's just these beautiful, beautiful women and children, faces of people that are coming over the border, pulling their luggage with plastic bags in hand. Some of these people left from the street, some left under bombing, some left from their places of work. Some had a day to prepare, and many of them, these women met on the road. They weren't friends before, but now they're comrades in the experience of being a refugee, a war evacuee. And each of these families, of course, has a story. This refugee center in Corsica was a refurbished warehouse distribution site that had been emptied of retail space and made into an area to receive emigres. And at the height, at the first couple of weeks, they had 5,000 people coming through this facility a day. When I got there, week 4, there were 500 people a day, which still seemed overwhelming. And still every single one of those people had their own story of loss and trauma. And it was, there are a lot of stuffed animals. It's interesting, provide comfort to people. It was amazing to see kids and teenagers reach for those for some kind of comfort. Those of you that read Cyrillic will recognize this as Deti, children. And people got to the border, as Angela said, in many ways. Some walked, and I'll have a picture here in just a minute. Some drove in their own cars, and some were dropped off, right, by their men or fathers or husband. And they would put these signs to help deter bombings from the Russians. So here's a scene walking through the 3 pictures here, walking into the door of the center. And the cots here on the left is what people sleep in. Here's a map, and Ukrainians, I was kind of surprised. They didn't seem to know that much more about European geography than drop an American down in here. This sign says, here you are. And where are all these towns? And by the time we got there, as we said, there were over 5 million refugees, evacuees in Poland. And Poland was, as they were saying, full. We're full in Poland. You got to go farther. You got to go outside. But a lot of communities in Poland were receiving, and we'll talk more about that, refugees. So here's a map, right, to help people orient themselves. Here it says, Y plus P equals love. And this says, Fu Russia, Fu to Russia. Here, breastfeeding room. So there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of attention to kids. Here's some more photographs. So these people would come across the border, they'd get on buses at the border there, and then come into this big facility and go up to this gate, and then to figure out what next. And the first 2 questions we would ask them was, number 1 is, do you have someone here in the West to receive you? Because if they did, then that was a whole nother path, right? It's all about connecting with that person. Most of the people didn't. So then the question is, how long are you planning to stay? And that's a heartbreaking question, because most people want to go home. But some people already had no home to go home to. A lot of that, when we were there, were coming from the Far East, from the Donetsk, Lugansk area, even from Mariupol itself, Slavyansk. I mean, just people really fleeing. It's hard to imagine. And you ask them, what do you, I mean, it's almost a cruel question, but it does make a difference, because from here they can go to Britain, Spain, Israel, I mean, but a lot of them wanted to stay close. So this is people standing in line. Where are their trains to? What should I do next? This is truly an existential moment. As Angela said, the Polish police were very present here, active. They had rules about the numbers of evacuees per police, and that impacted where evacuees could go, train stations. And over here on the right, you can see this is one of it's almost like a fair of countries. They think of like an international fair where countries are like, we're here and we'll come to the Czech Republic, and here's what we can offer you. And we'll talk in a minute more about how the US stacks up in that comparison. Here are the cots, so people, and the stuffed animals, and we just open them up, piles of blankets, piles of pillows, stores to give out feminine hygiene products, and surprisingly, pets. So a lot of people have their pets. And it's heartbreaking, right? And they are. What would you grab? So, and there's piles of pet food, leashes, even like litter boxes and stuff. Here's some more pictures. Thanks, Poland, from Ukraine. This thing on the right is one thing that astonished me. So I signed up, got an email, Angela's hiring and looking for people to volunteer. A lot of people just showed up. And it wouldn't have occurred to me to just show up, but I met this tatted up couple from Colorado. They told me the story. They just heard the news one day. They couldn't take anymore. They drove to the airport, bought plane tickets, flew to Warsaw, rented a car, drove to the border. I met and they set up this stand here. They stand out here all day and they offer tea, and then they just barter stuff. They have smiles and apples and tea and cocoa and coffee. And the place, the border's full of people that just came to help, which sounds good, but I want to offer a little note of caution. Angela might appreciate this, is that sometimes the volunteers suck up the resources that are meant for the evacuees themselves and become a burden themselves. So think about a place to eat, sleep, all that stuff. And so it's a fine line of helping and just being like a disaster tourist, right? So, and I struggled with that a lot because as a volunteer, I felt that I got a lot more out of the opportunity than I gave. But this is one example of how I was able to help. So what we're looking at here is, you can see in German, it's a German Red Cross. So imagine the pathos, people. Germans coming to the border with Ukraine to rescue Holocaust victims who survived World War II and are now being evacuated to Berlin and on to Israel. So this night at the border, there were 6 Holocaust victims. This old man says to me, I'm 88 years old, and I was 8 the first time I evacuated. And here they are being helped, and they didn't speak, Poles didn't speak, or the Germans didn't speak Ukrainian, and then nobody spoke Polish, and so we were helping them get settled for the 8-hour bus ride to Berlin. Here's some more pictures. This woman was herself a Holocaust survivor and getting on this ambulance to go on and probably never go home again. Angela talked about do the doable. Here's a picture of one of those warming tents. It was cold on the border. And again, stuffed with supplies, feminine hygiene products, toilet paper, juice, food, here's what it looks, us, this is me on the left here, helping emigres get into buses to go from the border to, this is our team, to somebody that had someone, right, to receive them, this elderly Holocaust survivor and his family. So I wanted to give a shout out to World Central Kitchen. Awesome. This group is amazing. How they did all over Poland. They are showing up. In fact, I was reading that they were going into Ukraine and actually setting up in communities on the east there in the republics where they're going everywhere. And not only did they have volunteer cooks, they had amazing produce. So I spent a couple days in this kitchen and we made 600 sandwiches. Check out those sandwiches. They had this amazing produce and beautiful salads and soups. And we would get boxed up and we'd wrap each one, and then they'd get sent out in bundles of 50 all across the country to train stations, bus stations, all over Europe. Is like this huge, and every morning you'd show up there and be waist deep in new produce and people showing up to making sandwiches. This is the border itself in Medica. This is the actual gate. And so the people walk across, I think I had a website. They walk across sort of a no man's land and pulling their suitcases and carrying their plastic bags, and are met here at the border. by, you know, people from all over the world who have shown up to help. These are French folks. You can see the in French, it says Francuski, something in Cyrillic. And of course, there is a tremendous amount of concern, and Angela talked about this, about trusted information, about exploitation, right? People are so vulnerable. They're so needy. They're so scared. And so everywhere is a lot of effort to give guidance. And you maybe read in the media the heartbreaking news of people, mothers writing their phone numbers and their kids' names on their bodies. But, you know, it's just to ensure and to try to be aware of the danger of exploitation and trafficking and safety. But from where I sat in the refugee center, it was super well organized. I was super assured. All the drivers and a lot of people, again, in the thing like I'm here to help, people would show up with cars, big vans, and sign and say, I've got a car and I can drive you on somewhere that you need to go, you know, and somewhere in Germany. But all those drivers had to be vetted by the police. So there was a list. So there's, you know, here's a picture of me and another woman on my team. She was a Russian immigrant also from Vancouver. Here we are at the medical border. And then in Warsaw and all over Poland, I mean, the spirit of support of the war and the love of Ukraine is really overwhelming. You guys know that the Polish flag is red and white, but yellow and red is the colors of Warsaw. Everywhere in Warsaw were signs of encouragement and support. But I just want to call out, as Angela said, you know, Poland is full, more people are coming. This is a ticking time bomb. And the Russian propaganda and people that I've heard from my husband say that it's Putin's secret weapon are these emigres, because Europe is going to get sick and tired of it. It's not like there weren't a lot of problems going on in East and Central Europe and Russia before this war. And all those issues are unaddressed, and it's just piling on. And so I think part of what happened, here's another, was really, I just want to end with some context here, what has to do with our white supremacy and America's racist foreign policy. So Angela talked about the Afghan resettlement. Afghanistan, you break it, you own it. We did a lot of damage there. So we've agreed to resettle up to 125 Afghans in our country. My faith community has been part of the effort that Alight's organized to accept Afghans. It's amazing. And now we've said up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. Okay, as my dad would say, compared to what? So is our refugee policy in America is unique in that the president has the sole authority to name the number of refugees we're going to take. He has that authority as president. And so under President Trump, the number of refugees that we, the nation of the Statue of Liberty and huddled masses and all that, to 15,000 was the number of refugees and our entire infrastructure to receive, process had been atrophied and destroyed and shut down. So since the new administration, we've got new goals, but you can see we're struggling to even make that tiny bit, not even 20% of our goals. And so, but even the bigger picture is globally, right? We're talking 274 million people, which is up, look at that, from the year before because of all the stuff, all the displacement. And Ukraine is a drop in that bucket. And we've said 100,000. And I just want people to know that there was no United States government in that refugee center accepting refugees. Greece, Spain, even Italy, poor EU members were there accepting. And you can see here that what the European Union has offered. And the United States has this, relatively, this very flexible compared to others, very easy compared to others, policy, uniting for Ukraine, humanitarian parole for 100,000, and it's for 2 years, but individual Americans have to assume the legal responsibility and the financial responsibility for those refugees. So there's no direct access and there's no real government support. Should you be interested in sponsoring a Ukrainian refugee in your home, you can do that by applying online. There is a security clearance involved, and you do have to sign, show that you're willing and able to support them for 2 years financially. I don't know the details about what support for financially. But I just want to point out that, you know, especially with the example of the Afghan refugees and before us and Ukrainian, that non-European refugees have faced racially motivated hostility in Europe. Afghans were pushed back violently on the Belarusian border. And, you know, I think a lot about how we've seen our hearts and minds open. And you guys saw a little bit about my family connection. Many of us maybe have that. But a lot of this, I think, is because there are people, right? As they say, nashi in Russian. Blonde and blue-eyed, they look like us. And I just want us to be mindful of the disparity with how we as NATO, the Northern Alliance, have responded to this refugee crisis, because there's a lot more like it out there. And in closing, I just wanted to share this really strong image from Warsaw. You'll see the little Lego piece down there. And this, amazingly, is a photograph from my hotel window in Warsaw. Look at this art in downtown Warsaw, all the things that could happen next. Thank you. That's what I got. And back to you, Mark.
Bernadine, thank you very much for that firsthand account of what's happening. It looks like you did some amazing work while you were there. The memories of that must just be with you every day. So it's amazing. We do have some questions. Let me get to some of the questions. Angela, this is for you. How many people from Alight are now working in Ukraine or in Poland? How are they paid? And I think one question to ask is, how can folks in our audience help with the current crisis?
Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Bernadine. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed hearing that journey that you were on and the pictures. The people in Ukraine, you know, I know that we have, I want to say 60 currently operating in our housing guide program. We have hired many Ukrainian refugees actually to become guides and help with the response. And it has been a bit difficult to find, you know, translators, people who can speak Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish, or even other languages as people are moving outward into Europe. And so that's been a really big lift for us, but we're finally, you know, really getting mobilized, finding those Ukrainian volunteers and people who can speak multiple languages and really help with the new arrivals. So I believe the number is 60. I could be wrong, but that is including all of our housing guides, as well as our doing the doable response on the border and other efforts to get medical supplies and things shipped. But then how they're paid. We are doing PayPal is kind of our cash right now, is the system that we're using for direct cash for all of our, for like the artists and the designers, for example. And so we are, you know, setting up systems within Alight's backend to do those payments directly. And so, yeah, we're contractually taking on guides, you know, they're going through our, you know, human resource as any other employee would at Alight. And so they're treated, you know, the same as any employee. And so I hope that covered. Was there another part of that question that I missed?
Yeah, so how can the people in the audience help? Is there financial donations, goods, time? What is it that's needed by Alight right now? And Bernadine, maybe you can add to this as well, having been there You know, what are the types of things people here can help out with?
Yeah, right now we are very much heavy in the fundraising because a lot of the resources that need to be purchased just need to be purchased outright in the locations that we're in. And so cash, right? So fundraising directly on our website for Ukraine Response is the best way to help at this time. However, I did mention the Aid to Art program. We are looking for, you know, I would say just connections more than anything to also understand how we can get this art distributed. What are some interesting ways we could be telling that story widespread across the country or elsewhere globally even to really share this artwork and the stories from refugees themselves and to help bring more awareness and funds to the response efforts.
And the best way is through the Alight website. Would that be correct?
Or to reach out to me directly, of course, too. Mhm.
Okay, all right. Bernadine, a question for you. So what was it? What was sort of the common thread that you were hearing or seeing from the refugees coming across the border in Poland?
So most of the refugees were Russian speaking, and because they were fleeing areas that were under attack, and so that, you know, that Putin's aspirations there. And so, you know, you could assume that they're Russian identified, they have Russian maybe family affiliation history, and maybe had thought of themselves as pro-Russian or pro, you know, friendly. But there was, I would say, you know, everyone was absolutely devastated about the loss. One of those women that used, whose photos I showed, she said, "What is he liberating us from?" You know, Putin has said we're liberating them from oppression, or from, even they've used the word genocide, that the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. So that was a sort of shock that how that he would do this, and real disillusionment with Russia, even among people that maybe had previously been sympathetic. And how that showed up also was in fissures in their own family. So I heard some heartbreaking stories about people saying, one woman said, you know, on the 4th day of the war, so we're in Kharkiv, and you recall that was bombed early in the war. And, you know, we'd been under bombing for 4 days, and my brother, who's in Tomsk, hadn't called me. So I called him and I said, "Hey, we're okay," you know, and she said he didn't believe me, that we were under bombing. And he said that it was, you know, that the Ukrainian government was doing it themselves to make the Russians look. I mean, she said she was in despair. Can you believe my own brother is believing the Russian media over me? And so there's I think a lot of shock. And I have to say, I don't know if what I saw was forbearance and courage or just shock. People stumbling forward. I can't imagine if I was in a position to now what, you know. So it's very existentially bracing, and it looks on the face of it, on the surface of it, like courage, but I'm afraid it may be fear underneath.
Yep. Yeah. I wish we had much more time. I think this is an extremely important topic, but extremely interesting to help better understand what's happening there and to understand this refugee crisis. But unfortunately, we're out of time. I do want to say that Angela put up the website for Alight. We are alight.org. Yes, this presentation is being recorded. It will be available on the East-West Connection site. And also within the East-West Connections newsletter by next week. If it doesn't appear, you can contact Todd Lefko at TLEFKO@msn.com. But this is being recorded and it will get out. I just want to take the opportunity again to thank our co-sponsors, the East-West Connections, the Museum of Russian Art, Global Minnesota, and a light. And also a huge thanks to Angela and to Bernadine for providing us with the information and their personal experiences. And with that, I think we're out of time. And again, thanks everybody for joining us. And for future programming for East-West Connections, again, you can check out the East-West Connections website. You might also have to try the Russian American Business Culture and Council, because we're going through a transition right now. So with that, again, thank everybody, and have a good evening, afternoon, or morning or night, depending upon where you are. Thanks for joining us.